So I will apologize. For some reason, I always want to call it the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcourt. I don't know why, but it's a running joke in our house. So if I say that, I apologize. I don't know why it came up, but why it happened, but I always say that. So
Oh, don't worry about it. I forget the names of my books at this point. Like by the time you're 2 books removed, I can't even remember any of the characters or any of the incidents. So I'll probably say something even daft. I don't worry.
this is the Other 51. I'm Brian, and this week my guest is author Stu Turton. My guest this week is the best-selling author of two of my favorite books from the past year, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle and The Devil in the Dark Water. He is a former journalist and working on several more novels. Delighted to have Stu Turton joining us. Stu, welcome to the Other 51.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you joining me. You are my first United Kingdom resident author that I've had in like the 4 or 5 years I've done this. So thank you for that honor.
Oh no, that's amazing. If you told me beforehand, I wouldn't have broken the trend. I would have stayed away like all the other British authors. Should have mentioned it.
That's why I didn't. So how are things? I mean, how is life in England? Kind of in this. I wanted to say tail end of the pandemic, but I don't think we're in the tail end of the pandemic. So how are things?
Do you know what? Here, it does feel at the tail end of the pandemic because we've got a government that will resolutely not go backwards, no matter how many people die. So it's a bit strange. I've got a 3-year-old daughter, so my life is just the same every single day. You're locked into this Groundhog Day routine of get her up at a certain time, take her to preschool at a certain time, breakfast at a certain time, bath at a certain time. It's very weird. And then you fit in the rest of your life around things that she wants to do. It's
Right.
bewildering to me.
So yeah, my daughter is 11, turning 11 this week as we record this
Mm.
actually, and so I love the dedication you wrote to your daughter at the beginning of Devil in the Dark Water. It took me back to that time when she was your daughter's age, so that was really beautiful.
Oh, thanks, mate. Yeah, because that was the thing for me as well. It was such a pain to write that book at that time because my daughter, I started Devil in Dark Water about 2 months before she was born, and I finished it about 2 weeks after she turned two. So it's such her life and her being is such a feature of that book, and there's so much of her sort of woven into it. But all I really remember looking back was how hard it was to have a 2-year-old and to try and write a book at the same time.
Yeah, right.
So I wanted to write something, you know how the memory plays tricks, so that in the
Mhm.
future I'll think, oh, what a wonderful, beautiful time that was, rather than, oh my God, I was so stressed and I wanted to murder you in your crib.
So interesting because I just read Devil in the Dark Water relatively recently. When you look back at that book, where do you see her in her life? Like, how is that in the book for you?
It's Sarah and her relationship with Leah, and it's kind of in the relation. It's in the idea of these women coming through and how strong you want them to be, and how independent you want them to be, and how they're going to tackle the world around them. So a lot of that sort of stuff started happening when I had this family, because my first book, 7.5 Deaths, is very man heavy. I mean,
Mhm.
it's very overloaded with penises, and it needed more women in it. But like, I didn't yet have a family, and something. It's a very strange thing as an author, the way your psychology changes on who's around you and who influences you and things. So like the amount of female characters in Devil is directly influenced by me having a family, by me having a wife and a daughter.
And I can tell you one thing I can thank you for from Devil in the Dark Water, along with being a great book and everything. I learned that the poop deck on a ship has nothing to do with poop.
I know it's disappointing, isn't it?
It's very is.
It's exactly the opposite direction to where the pooping would have happened as well. I know. I'm devastated. One of the few edits that my publisher actually had for the book is when it went through, and my publisher was like, "Was it really called a poop deck?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Is there anything else we can call it?" Because every time I read that, I started laughing. That's like, that's just history for you. There's nothing we can do about
Yeah.
it.
I am curious, and we're going to get to a little more spoiler heavy, probably talk about the books in a little bit here. But I am curious. One of the fascinating things about that book was learning so much about how ships in the 17th century were kind of structured, and not just physically, but where the crew was and where the kind of bigwigs were, and the passengers, and the layout of the ship. And it was a very controlled kind of environment where you didn't go past certain places. How much research did you do into kind of the life of ships in that time?
Oh, 3 months worth. I mean, I spent,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So I tried for this book because I wanted it to. It's funny, as we were saying, I think off camera maybe, when I started writing Seven Deaths, my first novel, that was very much supposed to be an Agatha Christie novel. It was a homage to Agatha Christie, and it took place in Agatha Christie time, which is just, the 1920s as viewed for Agatha Christie novels.
Hmm.
So I didn't do any research for that one because I just felt that as long as I'd read all the Agatha Christie books, I had the grounding of what I wanted to do. Whereas this one, because it was based on a real life incident, which was the wreck of the Batavia, it happened in a real time. These people weren't real, but there would have been equivalents on these ships. I wanted to get as much of that historical fact as I could. So before I wrote a word of it, I spent 3 months just doing research. So I went out to Batavia, which is modern day Jakarta, to have a look where the city is and look at the old city ruins and where the book starts. They've recreated this boat.
Oh, neat.
Well, so the boat that is the inspiration for my boat, that's been rebuilt. That floats. It's a floating museum off the coast of Amsterdam. So I spent 2 days rocking on board that. I just pestered everyone I could with questions on seafaring and knots and kind of how they sailed this damn thing. And then I went and sat in the British Library for about 6 weeks or something, and I just read through passenger manifests and journals and diaries from this period of like people who were on these boats and what the experience would have been. And then, as anybody who's ever done history knows, that I threw away 90% of what I of
Right.
what I learned because you just want it to be seasoning. You want it to feel authentic without feeling like a Wikipedia article. So, yeah, there was a lot of research, mate. A lot of research.
So, the pestering people reminds me of, my background as a journalist, and I know you were a journalist as well. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of talk about your career path, because I know I don't want to say it's an unusual one because everyone says they have kind of like the unusual winding career path to where they got today. But how did you get from, wanting to write, being a journalist to now author?
It's a bit weird for me because when I was young, I fell in love with Agatha Christie books. So I tell the story repeatedly, so I'm so sorry to anyone who's heard that. But such a strange start. My next door neighbour used to bring round stacks of Agatha Christie books that she'd buy from car boot sales, yard sales, I think, in the US.
Yep.
So she would just go out and buy them all for like a penny or 10 pence each, and she'd bring round the stack without fail every weekend. And we never asked her to do this. We don't know why it happened. She just did it. And I would, I started reading them and started loving them and started looking forward to the next weekend. And I would get through like 4 or 5 of these things a week. And by the time I was about 12, I had read every Agatha Christie book, all the short stories, the plays, everything. I'd read absolutely everything by her. And it was kind of ingrained in my head. And I remember, even to this day, having a very strange conversation with my mum where my neighbour started bringing around books that I'd read. And I was like, well, where are the new ones? And she was like, there are no new ones. You've read them all. And I was like, but I want some new ones. She's like, you can. And she's like, why can't Agatha Christie write more? She's like, no, she's dead. And I'm like, what is dead? Like, what is, explain to me. So I had this weird moment of realizing that things were finite and people died. And that all happened to me at 12. And my little brain just went, well, if I could write these, I would never be without them. And that's kind of what it started, was just, and it planted a little flag in the distance. I didn't know I didn't want to be an author. I didn't want to be a writer. I didn't know I could do either of those things. All I knew was that I wanted more Agatha Christie stories, and she wasn't around to write them, but I was, and that was it. So, and I didn't leave school or go to university or start my adult life, thinking I wanted to be an author or even a writer. I studied English and philosophy at university because I dropped out of a law degree because I hated law and lawyers. It turns out I went traveling. I went traveling for 3 months and ended up staying away for 5 years by mistake. Because traveling is great, it turns out, and no one asks you to do anything. So in that sort of 5 years, I did every other job conceivable. Like, I worked on a goat farm in Australia. I went diving for pearls. I cleaned toilets in private airports. I picked fruits. I was a teacher in Shanghai. And one of the many, many jobs I did, which I got through a friend, was that I used to write when I was traveling around South America. if there was a expat newspaper, it would always have like, and there usually was an expat newspaper and magazine. I would write pages for it. I would just about what experiences I had or what I was doing. And I became a journalist entirely by accident, just by doing that, just by doing these pages for people to earn some money so I could carry on traveling. And what happened was after about 5 years, I realized that all my friends were buying houses and having children and like, living adult lives. And I was
Right.
still dossing about in Asia somewhere. So I decided to go home and get on with my life, except I had no skills whatsoever, apart from I've been writing. Seriously, mate, no skills whatsoever. Nobody wants to hear how well you can pack a backpack. Nobody's interested in that in a job interview. Nobody cares about how quickly you can get a border crossing in Southeast Asia. It's not a thing. So I had to, the only thing I had were these pages that I've been writing for expat newspapers. So I applied and got a load of I applied at a lot of newspapers and magazines, finally got some internships and kind of became a journalist by mistake. And then it kicked off from there. And I wrote and really loved writing. And then I guess when I was about 25 or 26, I remembered this Agatha Christie thing that I wanted to do, and I sat down to write it, and it was just junk. It was horrific, as everyone's first novel is.
Right.
It was just an absolute mess of her ideas and her plot points, but without anything else. I just mashed them together in a new novel, and it was terrible. So I kind of realized that I needed my own original idea. And then I went away thinking I'd have that idea in a week or a month, and it took about 12 years. It was honest, and again, time just slipped by. So, I was working in London for a bit, and then I worked on a newspaper, and then I worked on a technology magazine, and then I went out to Dubai to work on a travel magazine in Dubai. I met my girlfriend, who's now my wife. We were living this lovely life, and I had the idea for 7.5 Deaths, and then immediately it was just like, right, well, that's what we're doing. So we had to uproot this amazing life we were living, this really glamorous life. We were going on holiday every 2 weeks because we were working for Etihad, the airline. And they would just send us on holidays to 5-star resorts every 2 weeks. That was our job. That's all we did. And we'd have to write about, it was insanely good. Like, I still haven't had a better job. And that's all I had to do was just do that. And then but I couldn't settle. Once I had the idea for the book, I had to convince my girlfriend of 6 months that I could pull this off. And then we came back to London because I needed gloom and the class system and misery and old houses. And we ended up living in a tiny 1-bedroom flat above a children's nursery. And I used to write to the smell of like nappies and wafting up the stairs and screaming children downstairs. And that was the career trajectory. And then I just was very, very lucky that the kind of book worked out well, and it was a book that people were looking for at that time.
So for anyone who hasn't read either 7.5 Deaths or Devil in the Dark Water, I mean, you should pause the podcast, come back in a few weeks. It'll be here. But I want to talk about the books. And so there are going to be some spoilers, unavoidable. So you've been warned. First of all, I do have a question from my wife, the editor, who was the first one to read 7.5 Deaths and just she just talked it up the whole way through. She loved it so much.
Okay.
I was reading Gentleman in Moscow at the time. We were on vacation in Vermont, and I was loving that book. And she's like, you got to finish that so you can finish this. I'm like, I'm loving this book. No, you got it. Anyway, it was a whole thing. But she's an editor, actually. That's her job. And she wanted me to ask you this question. What was your editor's reaction when you turned in that first draft of 7.5 Deaths?
Pretty good, because the first draft of 7.5 Deaths was complete. Like, it's not the draft that she got isn't very different to the draft she would have read, your wife and you would have read. That book, do you know what's very strange about that book is it's actually not very difficult to edit, because it had to fall out a certain way. The problem, I think, in editing a lot of the time for me with books is that the book can go one of 100 directions.
Okay.
And it's about focusing on certain elements and sort of focusing on certain emotions. But 7.5 Deaths was about plot. It was about this day, these minutes, these hours. The timeline was so strict and held together so fastly that you couldn't stray away from it too much. So the only thing that was ever of note was, are these people in the right places at the right time? And of all the people who are doing something at this moment, who are the most interesting? They were the questions always. And otherwise, it didn't change much. They hired my publisher in the UK hired a timeline editor specifically to
Okay.
come in, and her sole job was to sit down and make sure the timeline held together. But as for the rest of it, the edit, mostly of what came in that edit with my publisher was emotion, because I don't write emotion very well naturally. I have to think about emotion.
Mhm.
My characters would be kind of automata. They would just sort of like progress through the plot without any real reaction one way or the other. And I had to think about that a lot. And in Seven and a Half Deaths, it did fall into that a little bit in the first few drafts. And my editor was constantly saying to me, what are they feeling here? What are they feeling here? What's the emotion here? And that's what kind of got put in. Nothing technical, nothing sort of too plotty.
So I'm curious, how did you as a writer, I think both of us when we read the book were like, I cannot fathom putting the timeline together and putting, for those of you who haven't read it, it's basically an Agatha Christie mystery novel meets Groundhog Day. And that's a very simplistic description of it, but that's kind of with timeline shifting and different perspectives and all of that. So how did you, while you were writing it, how did you keep track of that timeline? Did you plot it all out? Did you, before you started writing, how did that process work?
Yeah, so it took about, yeah, I plotted it all out before I ever started. Again, that took about 3 months probably, all told. And I worked out every 2 minutes of every character's day
Oh,
before I
wow.
started writing. So, and I had that on a massive just Excel spreadsheet.
Okay.
And I knew, and that wasn't, that wasn't plot strictly. So it didn't tell me what each chapter would be. It simply told me where everyone was in the house and what they were doing. And then I plotted that over a huge map of the house and grounds, which I'd drawn. So I could work out, okay, and in that stage, I'd be thinking things like, right, okay, there seems to be a lot of incident happening in the ballroom here. So you need to start moving some of this out to other places. So I started inventing other places around the house. Okay, so we need things to be happening in a cemetery. We need things to be happening at this. What could we have? We could have a lake. Okay, so things go out to the lake, and I started dragging the incident out around all these different places. And then you have to start to work out. Okay, well, how long does it take someone to get from there to there? From the house to the lake is what, like 30 minutes? Okay, so they couldn't be in place to see this other thing happening, right? And your plot begins to kind of bubble up through these questions you're asking yourself and through these rules you've given yourself.
Okay.
And it was just, there was kind of that, and it was just allowing it to percolate in my brain for about 3 months. And I would shift things around. I would introduce new characters, take characters out, depending on. And I knew from the start that I had the murder. I always had the murder.
Mm-hmm.
And the big question that I had with Seven and a Half Deaths was what you've effectively got as a time traveling detective.
Right.
So if you've got a time traveling detective, how do you thwart that investigation? Because all they need to do is follow the murder victim around all day and see who murders them. That is the start point of an investigation. So there must be a reason that isn't a cheat and isn't a con why they can't do that. So from the start, I had those two things. This is how she's going to die. And this is why I have to work out why he can't solve that immediately. So the plot, again, just bubbled up out of that. So it was like setting yourself, there was no sort of like formula to it. It was just, I had a lot of problems in front of me and I gave myself 3 months to sort of work them out. And then as I was beginning to take all of that information and put it chapter by chapter, so this chapter's going to happen. What I was doing constantly was thinking, okay, well, what you've got there is a big chapter of heavy exposition. So the next chapter has to be actiony, or the next chapter after that can be a bit more dialogue, can be a bit quieter. And then a chapter after that. So I was constantly just trying to make sure that the experience for the reader was shifting and swapping beneath you. So you never got 5 chapters of someone giving you information or 5 chapters of me explaining what the house looked like. It was supposed to constantly feel like it was moving underneath you.
And I would imagine, just as you explain it, it kind of feels like that would help you when you're writing. Because one of my questions that I had was, what do you do, or did you ever kind of lose that thread of plot while you were writing it? It would seem like this kind of would help you, I don't know if keep you on track is the right way of putting it, but kind of help organize that in a way that would keep you from spinning out of control.
Yeah, so I've got my way of working, it seems, with Devin on my third book, which I'm writing now, is that once I've done that planning, I internalize that planning. So I'm very good. And I suspect the only talent I have is that once the plan is made, I don't have to return to it. I never have to look at it. So I can tell you chapter 27 of a novel just off the top of my head, and I can go and write that. So I never write in chronology. I will just write whichever chapter I feel like writing that day.
Okay.
And I suspect that's because it is so, all my books are quite rigidly planned out before I start. And once it's there, once I've got the skeleton, I know what's happening. The only thing I don't plan is character too much, because I just can't. I've tried it and I can't do it. I can't make characters feel real without writing them. So I've got to, what I end up doing is wasting quite a lot of words and writing time, just having my characters interact, mashing them together and letting them talk to see
Okay.
what comes out of it. So sometimes the plot has to be slightly tuned around whether, and this happened a lot more on Devil than it done Seven and a Half Deaths.
Okay.
There was characters in Devil who just didn't want to do the things that the plot demanded of them, so I had to rejig the plot around those characters and give things to other characters in the novel to try and make that work. But again, it's quite an on-hoof process.
Can you give me an example of that from Devil?
Oh yeah, of course. So, for example, there's two main characters. Well, there's three characters in that, really. Three protagonists: Aaron Hayes, Sarah Vessel, and Sammy Pipps. Sammy Pipps and Aaron Hayes are supposed to be a sort of Sherlock Holmes and Watson style duo, but in 1634, which makes them a bit more rough and ready. And Aaron is a huge hulking mercenary character, and Sammy is a Sherlock Holmesian sort of style investigator. And Sarah is a noblewoman married to ostensibly the villain of the piece. And she initially was almost supposed to be, she was plotted as first amongst suspects. She had more time than the other suspects in the book, but she wasn't a protagonist of the novel necessarily. She was supposed to have shifting motives. She was supposed to sort of slide into the story and slide away from it. You're always supposed to have one eye on her, thinking, did she do it? Did she not? And you're never quite sure whose side she was on. Because the entire intention, though, was that she would always be on her daughter's side. That's who she loved most, and that's who she was fiercely protective of.
Okay.
But what happened was, and then the plot demands, and these are no spoilers because it happens in the first page of the book, is that Sammy Pipps' character is locked up in chains. He's put away, so he can't solve the mystery. So it's up to Aaron to step up, the Watson-style character, to step up and solve the mystery. Except when I started writing him, he didn't want to do it. Like, that character, Aaron Hayes, had absolutely no interest in being the Sherlock Holmes protagonist of this. He didn't want to do it. And the more I wrote it, the more false it felt, the more him as a character kind of wriggled and shifted underneath me. Just didn't want to do it. Sarah wanted to do it. Sarah wanted to be the protagonist of this novel. She wanted that power. She wanted that drive. She wanted that focus, and she was intelligent enough to do it. And the more I wrote her, the more of Aaron's plotting I ended up giving to her. So she became the driver of this novel. She became the instigator of a lot of the plot points that Aaron was supposed to have. And Aaron slipped back almost, not quite, but almost into his sidekick role, but with Sarah instead of Sammy. And that completely took me by surprise. That's not the way I planned that novel. So Sarah and Aaron started to develop a relationship, which hadn't, again, been in the plot. That wasn't supposed to be there. But every time they came together, there was something mutual that they found in each other, that they were enjoying each other. And this makes me sound like a sociopath, like I have absolutely no control over the voices in my head. But it's truly the way that book wrote itself. But there was none of that in Seven Deaths. Seven Deaths was so rigid in its planning because it had to be, because that day just wouldn't have worked out any other way.
Right. No, I was going to say, and I've interviewed other authors and read other authors, and that kind of interaction that comes out between the characters, it really does, for a lot of people and a lot of writers, it does feel like it's almost happening outside of your control, which is a weird thing to say because you're typing it, but it does. And I'm just curious, what does that feel like as you're working on it and you realize that Sarah and Aaron are like coming together in this relation, and the things are changing from the original plot? What are those moments like for you as a writer?
So it's because my two books are so completely different. And that was the stated aim before I started, and it's the stated aim of the third one. I would almost prefer it if I could take my name off the books, and you would constantly feel like you would have to guess who wrote them. I don't want them to necessarily feel like it's one author behind these books, apart from certain trademark things that you can't help. So I changed the style of them quite heavily. I don't use as many. So Seven and a Half Deaths was quite ornate. Devil was not as ornate. Devil, because it was in a brutish, sort of more despairing time. The metaphors, there's very few metaphors, and what there are quite like stark and strong. And Seven and a Half Deaths is very gilded. So going into the novels, and I plan them completely differently as well, they automatically feel like their own things. So from the beginning, they're a surprise, and that's kind of the way they're engineered. everything about them is supposed to take me by surprise. I'm supposed to have new challenges. I'm supposed to make new mistakes. I'm supposed to have completely new characters. So when those relationships started forming, there was a bit of me that's just like, oh, cool, that's what this novel is doing. Like
Okay.
that's what this one is going to be. Whereas I think Seven and a Half Deaths wrote exactly the same way it reads, things clicking into place constantly, sort of like, oh, that's where that goes, or oh, that's how that links to that. That
Okay.
connects up,
Yeah.
sort of. And in those moments of writing, the idea was, oh, the difficulty of Seven and a Half Deaths was to make the reader feel the significance of those things slotting into place and those little connections being formed without them feeling overwhelmed by it, without them
Mhm.
feeling that they had to hold all the information. Whereas this one was like, oh, okay, so these characters are going to start. So what's that relationship? So and then I let them guide me that way, whereas I never did in Seven Deaths. So it wasn't a thing that took me by surprise, and it wasn't a thing that scared me. It just kind of felt like a part of this novel. Like each novel is its own little baby, and they kind of like develop and grow completely differently to the last one. And that's the only thing that keeps me interested in it. Otherwise, I would have quit ages ago.
You said that you would love to take your name off the books and have them kind of read fresh without an author's name. Why is that?
I just think if you start doing this long enough, and I've only written 2 books, but it takes me a long time to write books, there comes a certain expectation. People read Seven and a Half Deaths, and people who loved the Seven and a Half Deaths really loved it, and they wanted Eight and a Half Deaths and Nine and a Half Deaths. They wanted me to do those type of novels forever, and I had no interest in writing those novels forever. And it took, and I've heard this from people who read Seven and a Half Deaths and then read Devil, um, consequently took them 10, 15, 20 pages to work out that I wasn't going to do the same thing, that I had
Right.
no interest in doing that. Some people to the point where they had to put the book down because they were so disappointed that I wasn't doing that same thing. So it was like I felt like I'd made them a promise that I'd never actually uttered out loud, right?
Right.
Um, so if I took my name off the book, I kind of get the sense that I would just be allowed to sort of, and I am allowed, don't get me wrong, I'm doing whatever I want with each novel, but
Mhm.
people could just pick the book up fresh, the way they've done with Seven and a Half Deaths, or people who read Devil first. You just pick that book up with no expectation of what it will be, and you just open the pages and you just read and you go for it and you can follow the story. I would be delighted to take the blurb off the back of the book as well. I would just, if it was just me, it would be a solitary color and a title, and that would be all you'd get.
Well, it makes sense too, especially after Seven and a Half Deaths, because it's kind of like the M. Night Shyamalan thing in movies where you're like waiting for the twist, and where's the twist? And maybe there's no twist in this book. And then, yeah, I can see how that could be. Um, I can see how that's frustrating from a reader standpoint if you kind of go in thinking something, you're expecting something. But I can also see from a writer standpoint do I try to rewrite the same kind of thing, or am I pigeonholed now to writing a twisty book when I don't want to write a twisty book?
Well, it's strange for me because I was stupid enough to not expect it because when I went to my publisher and they have that conversation with you, they're like, right, okay, so what do you want your career to look like? And I said straight up, I'll be writing standalones. There'll be no series. There'll be no sequels. Each book will be its own thing, and they're going to take me a long time. I'm not here for a book a year. I can't do that. It's not in my skill set. So they'll take at least 2 years each. So in my head, my publisher's head, my agent's head, we all know what my career would look like. But of course, no one's relayed that to readers. So they're
Right.
like, oh, when am I? This one, obviously, like the Seven Half Deaths, clearly sets itself up for a sequel. I'm like, it really doesn't. Or
No.
like Devil, like people now are discovering Devil and saying things like, oh, I hope we get more adventures with these characters. And I feel terrible for saying that's not going to happen. Or some people have been confused because it feels like the final book of a series, which was an intentional thing that I did in the writing.
Oh,
But
that's
they're
true. It
fine.
does. Yeah. Now that you say that, absolutely, it kind of has that feel to it.
Yeah, completely. And that was the way it was designed because I wanted you to
Yeah.
feel like you were coming into a lived-in relationship between these characters. Sammy Pipps and Aaron Hayes are like, they're supposed to be at the tail end of this long, illustrious career. And I want you to feel that. And I want you to feel the depth of this friendship between them, the camaraderie. But some readers have got really confused because they think that they've missed the first 10 books or they've missed the first 5 books because my characters keep referring to them like it's sort of a trick that they haven't really seen before.
Yeah.
So there were little things like that where I'm like, oh yeah, if I just take my name off it, maybe people wouldn't be so worried about those things.
So I want to get back to Agatha Christie real quick because you mentioned her a lot at the beginning. It's funny. I started rereading some Agatha Christie novels after watching Knives Out, which is a very much another homage to an Agatha Christie
Hmm.
type novel. And reread Murder on the Orient Express specifically, and God, that's such a great book.
Hmm.
What is it about What was it about her stories that captured you when you were younger and stayed with you, do you think, that you wanted to write kind of in that style, especially for the first book?
So let's do two things here. One is let's have a gigantic argument about Murder on the Orient Express, because you are entirely wrong, Brian. That is a terrible book.
Really? Okay.
So the Murder on the Orient Express is very strange because it is her most famous book, but what it actually is an ending. It's an ending. It's not a book. The rest of the book is a series of interview vignettes, but nothing really connects them. So you get this sort of, he goes from like one passenger to the next passenger, right? And he says da,
Right.
da, 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 da. And it's something to do with the location because it's quite contained. But the actual structure of the book is incredibly repetitive, and then you get this amazing ending at the end of it. And if that ending, I think, this is my personal thesis, if that ending had been any other ending, any less successful ending, that book would be junk, like completely junk.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I think there might be
All right.
remembered as junk. And it's so funny. So I'm like that person. I'm the one person who's just like, I hate everywhere I go. I hate that book because I love 90% of what she did. And when I got to the end of it, I was always like, Murder on the Express is terrible. And then you got into the world and it was like, it's an amazing book. I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, that's really so. But that brings us to why I love him. I love her. The endings to her books are sensational. Usually, the actual conclusions, the actual denouement of her books are nearly always fantastic. They're never outlandish for me, or very rarely outlandish. Sherlock Holmes, for example, you get to the denouement of a book and it's ridiculous nearly
Right.
all the time.
Yes.
Every single time, it's like a snake did it, and you're like, oh, really? So but Christie never did that. It always plotted together. It always had that nice feeling in my head that I was trying to do 7.5 Deaths, which is where you felt things click, 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 click into place. So like, oh, that's why that happened. That there was a chain of events that was perfectly logical, that felt very real, and a crime was committed. Even if the crime was heightened, it felt plausible.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I loved about those books was that I always felt they were fair. I always felt they were like a board game that I was playing against Agatha Christie. So she lays out the pieces, she lays out the board, she tells you everything. Where is everybody? Where can they get to? The detectives ask the questions so that you're thinking in your head to rule them out as you go along. And it's just all put in front of you, and you can solve them if you make notes and if you pay attention and if you're as clever as she is. And most of the time, you're not. But I love
Right.
that. I love the idea that she felt confident enough in her own writing, her own plotting, that she would give you a chance to play. And I don't get that nearly enough in modern novels. I don't think that's there. There's usually, we find out about a witness or a clue or something very late in the day that sort of like, and then a detective has an intuition and off they go.
Right.
I always find that. So I've never found that same sense of enjoyment and fulfillment since. And that's what I loved about it. And that's the bit that imprinted. And so for me, writing novels, I always think that's something I kind of have to do. That's something I have to sort of honor because it's part of why I love those stories.
So if you could recommend, since Murder on the Orient Express is apparently hot garbage, can you recommend an Agatha Christie book for me and for other people to kind of like, what's a good one for us to read, to jump into?
So the best one is The Third Floor Flat, it's called.
Okay.
And it's a short story, and it's about a apartment, in Poirot's building. There's an apartment 2 floors down. And one night, these party goers stumble into this flat by accident and find a dead body on the floor. Poirot, who's upstairs drinking a herbal tea, comes down in his dressing gown, tours the apartment, has a look around, sees the body, walks out. It's like, yeah, I know who did it, and he goes back to his flat. And that's almost the end of the book, and it's all done. And it is completely wonderful. It's everything that Hercule Poirot is as a character. It's all his intelligence. It's genius plotting. It's a conclusion that comes together beautifully and satisfyingly. It's utterly wonderful. So that one, and that's one that a lot of people haven't read, but it is the ultimate example of what that detective and with that writer can do and how it works. So I'd always recommend that. And then there's obviously my personal other favorite is And Then There Were None, but that's everybody's favorite, really. And that's as much a horror novel for me, a gothic horror novel, as it is an Agatha Christie novel. And it's got some of her less wonderful writing, shall we say. I think she at this point had got to a point in her career where I think she worked out that her readers didn't overly care about the characters, so she doesn't invest a lot of time. She gives you shorthand characters, like this is a playboy because he's driving a fast car.
Right.
This is a widow because she's lost this, blah, blah, blah. But the plot is meticulous. Those characters, she actually does grow and change as things go along. And the location is just wonderful. It's just an isolated island, and they're getting picked off one by one with again, a fantastic conclusion. So they're my two favorites.
So I ask everybody I have on the podcast this, so I'll ask you, what's the best thing that you've read lately?
What is the best thing I've read lately? Oh God. So this is a bit embarrassing, but when I'm writing, I don't read a lot generally. I find it very, very hard to sort of stir at another book after I've just finished writing a book.
Sure.
The last thing I read was probably The Instance of the Finger Post by Ian Pearce.
Okay.
Which is a great historical mystery novel. And if anybody likes Devil, I would recommend An Instance of the Finger Post. It's doing a lot of similar things.
Okay.
But it's far more historically rigorous. But it's just wonderfully entertaining. So I'd probably recommend that. But again, I finished that embarrassingly, about 5 months ago or something.
I mean, you're busy. That makes sense. And you've got a 3-year-old. It's amazing you can read with a 3-year-old at all. I remember those days.
Oh, I just lock her outside in the cold.
That's fine. It teaches resilience. So I can recommend Project Hail Mary. It's the book by Andy Weir. He's the author of The Martian, and it's his newest book. And if it's really, really good, really well done, very similar. I want to say similar to The Martian, but his style of writing is so smart, and it's technical and funny. And it was I think it was one of those books I read in like 2 days. In part because it was due at the library, but also in part because it was very good and a very good, fun read. So I can recommend that. Stu, when is do you have a date for your next novel? Not to put any pressure on you.
No. It's theoretically due to my publisher in about 2 months, but it will definitely not be there in 2 months. I don't miss deadlines. It's a question of how many deadlines I miss.
Okay.
Like, it's not the first one is a guide, really, more than anything else. So I think I missed 5 on Devil, and I think I'm probably aiming for about similar for this one. So I don't know. It'll be 2023 somewhere. Probably.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'll speak for everyone listening. We're looking forward to it when it comes out. Maybe we'll have you back on to talk about it when it does come out. But thanks for joining me this week. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, mate. I really, really appreciate it. This has been great.
Thanks for listening to The Other 51. Show notes for this and all of our episodes can be found at sportsmediaguide.com by clicking on the Other 51 tab. If you like the show, please consider giving it a rating and a review, either at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help people find the show. Our theme music is by Moritz.